we never did hear from Moses again, so hopefully we'll see something in the next episode. But so welcome back to my channel. I am back with a recap of Scarlet and the Duke season 1 episode 3. Okay, this episode opens with Scarlet. She's in her office. She's kind of restless, fumbling through papers, and then you realize that she's waiting on the Duke, who has the gall to show up drunk and
2 hours late.
And he tells her that Scotland Yard wants to hire her. You know, they have a couple of groups that they're looking at, and they wanted her to infiltrate this one particular group. And of course, she was initially happy about, you know, being given this opportunity to kind of prove herself, until she realized the group that they wanted her to infiltrate. So now she's at home. She's talking to Evie. And she's coming up with this fake persona. And so she came up with the name of Mrs. Alice Morgan. Her husband is a solicitor. They don't have any children, and they have 2 dogs. Of course, Evie doesn't want her to get involved. And, you know, she is pretty much, you know, let the men deal with that. And, you know, she was trying to read the flyer. And they made it a point to focus on the fact that Evie couldn't read or write. And this comes back up later on in the show. Mrs. Morgan attends her first meeting, and the first person that she meets is Flora Mumford. And in her haste, she's all nervous, right? So she ends up blurting out her whole damn story about how her name and her husband and what he do and the kids and the dogs and the whole thing. And of course, the woman's like, oh, okay, a little fun facts about you. So they all sit down. It's probably like 10 people in the room. And so the speaker, she got up to speak, and the speaker is Margaret Fairfax. And of course, she's going into, you know, how there's this act that's about to be passed in Parliament and how they need to be there. And while she's talking, one of the constables came in and told them that there are 3 carriages parked on the road that need to be moved. And she goes into, you know, well, that road is hardly used. And then he recognized Scarlet was about to blow her cover. And she ends up pulling him outside to talk to him. And I'm about to use my Bobbi Brown foundation in Warm Almond. And this is the long wear even finish foundation. Of course, I'm going to put all this in the description box. And so, during the conversation, he ends up saying to her,
I thought you were one of Duke's tarts.
And then he told her that he was going to go back inside. She ends up grabbing his arm.
Touching an officer of the law is an offence.
And then he doubled down on it, right?
Mind you, I'm sure you've touched a few in your time.
So she ends up punching the crap out of him. At this point, all of the other women inside are at the door, so they see this interaction. And she is hauled off to jail. So, of course, Duke is not happy about that. He's telling her, like, I told you, you know, that I needed you to infiltrate this group, and how not to get into fights with cops and getting arrested again, because, you know, the previous episode, she went before the judge a couple of times, right? And, you know, she was telling him that, you know, how the officer was rude to her and how he needs to reprimand the officer. And then he says to her,
so you wish me to be chivalrous when it suits, but treat you as an equal when it does not? Are you a woman or a detective?
And then she asks the question, like,
why should there be distinction? I would not ask you if you were a man or an inspector.
And of course, he went into, well, that's different. And she absolutely asked them to explain, well, why is that different? And he proceeded to say,
well, there is a level of self-control that's vital when doing this job.
Now notice that I said earlier that he showed a better office drunk. And he's now on the clock drinking again. So is that, you know, the self-control that he was referring to? But anywho, as she was leaving, she realized he wasn't going to do anything about that. And as she was leaving, Margaret was outside waiting for her. And she told her that, you know, I know that there's going to be some type of legal action. So when is your court hearing? Because she, you know, wanted to be there, I guess, get the group together to be there. And, you know, they talked for a bit. And she ends up inviting Scarlet to the next meeting. Scarlet initially was like, you know what, I have a lot on my plate right now. I really can't do this. And of course, she attributed it to, her husband and, how her husband, may not like this. Is Margaret saying, don't you get tired of, men telling you what to do, or them always thinking that they know what's best. And she talked about how she, wanted to go to college. And of course her father didn't. This is, again, Margaret is saying how she wanted to go to college and how her father didn't want that for her, and she ended up taking the money and going anyway, and basically talked about how great she was at chemistry, but of course her education isn't recognized because women aren't, it's just the times in which they lived. And eventually Scarlet, she asked Scarlet again to come to the meeting. And eventually Scarlet relented and decided that she would go. Okay, so it's the next meeting. Scarlet arrives, and her welcome is not what it was when she initially got there the first time. And of course it was off-putting, and she couldn't really figure out, okay, well, what's going on. Mrs. Mumford came in and basically was like,
Mrs. Morgan, I was unaware you were invited.
And then the Duke and the constable came in, and he's saying that he's looking for Margaret. And then he saw Charlotte, and basically just was like, you know what, Charlotte? He blew her cover, basically said her real name, and asked her what she was doing there. And so the next time you see them, they're both in the morgue. And they're examining this body. Now, at this point, all they know is that this body was found in front of Margaret's house, and that the people saw her shoot him. And so they're looking for her for murder at this point. They don't know who this man is. And, of course, they're doing their whole back and forth. And how, he's telling her how she's the only thing he needed from her was for her to infiltrate the group and write a report, and he agreed to let her stay if she write the report, but of course she's more interested in what's, the guy on the table, and eventually he tells her that she doesn't work for Scotland Yard. He was basically throwing her a bone as a friend. Of course, initially she was offended, but then, they continue to go back and forth like they do. She gets under his skin like no one can but her. And the next thing you know, she found herself on the other side of those doors. She had been escorted out at the board. So she's back at her office, and of course, during these episodes, she'll have these sporadic conversations with her dad when she's trying to work some things out. So she got back to the office, and her dad was explaining things to her. Now, this isn't things that she doesn't already know, but he felt like it had to be said. So he basically told her that you need William as an ally.
You need him as an ally, Lizzie.
If you're going to be successful, basically you're going to need a man in your corner to help you. Obviously it's not the ideal situation, but the time in which they lived, that was just the way of the world. And then, he explains to her the difference how, society view men and women. And he's saying that, when a man loses his temper,
he is seen as strong and forthright.
And of course, when a woman loses her temper,
she is seen as emotional, hysterical, incapable of rational thought.
And of course, this is not just based on those times. That is still the thought process of a lot of people. And he basically told her that what men understand are facts. She got the message. And so what she did was she enlisted the help of Moses.
I'm working a murder case for Scotland Yard, and I need your help.
So now she's back in Duke's office. She now has this file. She's done all this research on Margaret. She finds out that Margaret Fairfax isn't her real name. Well, Margaret is her real name, but her last name is something else. She found out that, her parents are dead, that she has a brother that she's estranged from that's part of the Brownlee Club, which is a gentleman's club. Women are not allowed. She wanted to show him that she could, be an asset, and she doesn't want them to always be fighting or competing, and she's not trying to one up him. She's basically trying to prove herself, and that she really wants his respect. And so when she took that approach, he ended up, based on the information that she gave him, he ends up calling one of the officers in to investigate some of the information that she gave him. Okay, so the Duke, he made it to the Brownlee Club. He found her brother, and initially he wasn't too keen on talking about his sister. He's like, I hadn't talked to her in years, and they've been estranged for a while. And basically, the Duke had to threaten to make a scene and drag him out of there in cuffs and drag him down to the station. So eventually, he relented and decided it would be in his best interest to go in and talk to the Duke. And so during that conversation, he told him that, basically his sister has always been radical. His words were, she was a fanatic. She always, thought that it wasn't fair that, they had these gentlemen clubs, and, they have all these, the laws that exclude women from society, from any key roles in society. And like from the time he can remember, she was always a fighter. She was always an advocate. And he talked about how, it caused problems in their family, and how him and his sister and his father ended up getting into it. And then eventually the brother ended up cutting off her allowance. And when Duke asked him about, what he thought of his sister, he basically told him exactly what he thought about her.
The woman is unhinged, capable of anything.
So Scarlet makes it back to her office, and she realizes she's not alone when she sees that Margaret is there, and Margaret has a loaded gun pointed at her head. And so they talked for a while, and Margaret was under no delusion. She knows that she's in trouble.
I will hang for killing that bully. I accept that.
But her whole thing is that she wanted her death to mean something.
But let my arrest further the cause.
And she wanted Scarlet to come with her, and of course Scarlet declined. So the Duke is at Scarlet's house, and he's giving her an update on the conversation he had with Margaret's brother. And he's basically telling her what Margaret's brother think of her, and how she's always been radical. And then he asked her that he wanted her to do the interviews for the women in the group. And Scarlet is conflicted. She's torn, and she's basically saying that she wants to get off this case, that she just really can't continue. And then he says, that's fine. I can't make you, but, I'm not going to pay you. And of course she's like, huh?
But you will not get your fee.
What?
And his thing is, I hired you to do a job. The job isn't done. And so if you want to get this money, then I'm going to need you to do the interviews with these women. So Evie eventually walks in and tells Duke that there's a messenger there to talk to him. And once they are out of the room, she tells him that it's not really a messenger for you, but it's a guy that I had never seen before, and I think it's best that you answer the door. So when he went to answer the door, you see old Moses standing there, and of course the Duke is trying to figure out why are you there, and he's not really forthcoming. He's like, I'm here to talk to Scarlet, and of course the Duke wants to know why, and he's like, basically my business is with Scarlet. And so the Duke basically, tells him that, he's familiar with him and his criminal record and the whole thing. And he told him, Moses ends up telling him that they had a business arrangement. He's basically there to get paid. And so the Duke ends up giving him one, I guess, I don't know what that coin was worth. I guess as payment for whatever work he did for Scarlet, and then he gave him another coin for him to stay away. In the end, Moses ended up leaving one of the coins on the table and walking out. Like, nah, the only person that could tell me not to come here is the person that hired me. I mean, that was basically his attitude. He didn't say anything. He just left the coin and he walked out. So Scarlet is now back at the station, and she's starting the interviews with some of the members. And she's interviewing Flora Mumford first, the woman that she initially met. And she was being kind of rude, and, you know, she was telling her how the reason they were so cold to her was because they didn't appreciate her approach, and they wanted everything to be done within the confines of the law. And when she struck the officer, it reflected poorly on them. And then she started getting real snarky about how she wasn't going to answer any more questions. And, because Scarlett's not a real police officer. And then eventually, you know, she got tired of that because the constable was in the back snickering every time Mumford would say that she wasn't going to talk to anybody but a real officer. And she ends up, you know, saying to the constable,
"Do you have a problem with your sign, Mrs. P.C. Honeychurch? If so, I could ask Inspector Wellington to investigate an alternative situation for you."
And then she turned her attention on Mrs. Mumford.
"And if I feel your responses are hindering this investigation, I will have no hesitation to request your detainment overnight in one of the cells."
And got some act right from both of them. So she's now giving Duke an update on her interview, and she was informed that there was a disagreement between Mumford and Fairfax about their charitable donations. And the Duke, I think it was the Duke that mentioned the Chancellor School, and she realized that that's where Margaret said the school that she attended. And so they went to the school to figure out, you know, what happened. And so the guy they were talking to basically said that she was kicked out because she had an inappropriate relationship with one of her professors. And this is when we find out that the guy in the morgue is Dr. Gills. He was her professor, and, you know, they had a relationship. So now they now have an ID for the guy, because the guy made it a point to say that he hasn't been to work in a few days, no, because he's been in the morgue. So the school, I guess they let them into his office, and they saw all these jars. It was clear that they were doing something, and then they turned over one of the jars, and they realized that what the jars contained. And they realized that they had built a bomb. And of course, Scarlet realized what was, you know, she was putting the pieces together and realized what Margaret was going to do with that bomb, with said bomb. So now they're back at the police station, and Duke is trying to get, you know, everybody on the same page. He's trying to make sure he got the officers where they need to be. And although it wasn't shown, she did eventually tell him about the conversation that she had had with Margaret. And as you can imagine, he was hot as fish grease. He was so hot, they running around town trying to find this woman, and she'd had this conversation with this woman this whole time, and so he had felt betrayed. And, you know, initially he was unusually calm, which kind of was off-putting to her. And then, you know, he flashed on her. And, you know, he basically told her exactly how he felt about how, you know, she's handled herself. And it got to the point where he told her,
"When I return, I do not want you here. In fact, I never want to see you again."
So then we flashed to Margaret, and Margaret then got a job at the Brownlee Club as a maid, which is interesting. Okay. You can't come in and have a drink and sit and have a conversation, but you can clean their shitty toilets. So, I mean, I ain't saying I agree with her methods, but I understand the frustration. So, Margaret makes it up to the room that she's supposed to clean, and now she's about to seize her opportunity to pull this bomb out, and she's about to trigger this bomb, or at least set the timer on this bomb, and then, of course, Duke and the other constables appear, and she realized the jig is up. Okay, so now they have her back at the station. She's sitting across from Duke and Scarlet. And she basically goes into how Gil was in on it, how he helped her build the bomb, but then he got cold feet, and she was afraid he was going to go to the cops, and basically that's why she killed him. And then she turned her fire on Scarlet, basically saying that as a woman detective, like, how far you think that you're going to go, and there's only so far they're going to let you go because, you know, you're still dependent on men. And how what I was doing was for the greater good. But basically what you're doing is self-serving. And it left, it left her, feeling some kind of way. You can see that she was thinking about, throughout this entire case, she was torn. She was torn between what she knows to be right and fair and what was legal. And so basically Duke told her that she doesn't really know you or what you're about. She don't really know who you are. So basically don't take what she's saying with a grain of salt. So Duke is now meeting with his superior, giving him the closed file. And, he's congratulating him on a job well done and, talking to him about a possible promotion. And then he says to him,
do thank the rest of your department for their work on this. Was there anyone in particular you wish to commend for their efforts?
And of course they, quickly move to the next scene because like, okay, what were you about to say? What were you going to say? All right. So we go back to Scarlet's house, and this is where, the whole thing about Evie not being able to read and write comes back up. And I think this case kind of opened her eyes about a lot. Like, she was aware of the disparities, but I don't think that she put much thought into, while there are disparities and there are doors that are not open to her, that there are also doors not open to people who are not as privileged and as affluent as her, such as her maid Evie. And one way to open up more doors is education. And so the episode ends with her basically starting to teach Evie how to read and write.